Welcome. We're starting this podcast. This is episode number 1 of what we're calling Conversations with Life, Exploration in Ecstasis. And we want to have this conversation because we've been having a conversation, not with just each other, but with life, with how things are, with what is. And we're both explorers, probably like yourself, trying to figure things out in this world, and coming up with some interesting experiences, some interesting questions, and some interesting personal answers. Just to introduce myself, and we'll get into that in a minute. My name is Steve Barfus, sometimes known as Cedar, and I am a teacher, coach, healer. My business is called Soul and Spirit Wellness, or Spirit and Soul Wellness. I'm dyslexic, it doesn't matter. And the idea is, behind what I do is authentic spirituality, finding one's own really good path to meaning. And everything I do revolves around that journey. And I think, yeah, that's me. Introducing wise, I guess. But we'll talk more about the journey later.
I'm Sochi, Sarah Millington. I go by Sochi mostly, but I'm cool with whatever. Soch is kind of my nickname. I am probably the best word for what I do is embodiment coach, but it just sort of is this interesting soul shaman piece where I feel like I help people who are on a soul journey kind of land the stuff into their body, but also into their daily lives, so that they're living the things that they're learning, and that as their awareness and consciousness expands, that they know how to bring it home. I do kind of emphasis on sexuality and pleasure as a path for that soul landing, and as a path for healing, because I think most people have a lot of sexual shame and trauma that wants to be addressed and worked with, and that life force energy, once it's free, is really powerful. Really fun way to live is with that activated. So yeah, that's me. That's kind of where I am, what I'm doing, all sorts of other crazy things going on in my life, but that'll do for now.
Totally. Great. So we want to get into this, and we want to start the conversation, and this is a conversation. So during this video, this podcast, one of us will start on a conversation, the other one will respond. So we're going to do this conversation wise. And why the conversation? One of my favorite poets and teachers, David White, talks about the conversation that life is. And he's talking about how you never ever become who you actually, what you want. You never really get what you want or become who you are, and you never really become what society needs you to be. But somewhere in the middle there's this conversation. And life is about that conversation. And we're moving out of a time where answers were provided, the materialistic idea, the religious dogma idea, where here are the answers. We know what's right. We know what's true. We know what's there. And I feel like we're moving from that into what I call the energy revolution, and that is that it's the question. It's about the question. Answers are great. I love the science. We'll talk about the science. I love the mystical experiences that people have, that they experience in these big ways. All of this is beautiful. Tradition and our own lived experience, and all these things coming together, philosophy and psychology and spirituality and all the different types are all there. This idea, though, being in the conversation, I think, is really the path coming out of that dogma place. So this is our conversation with the conversation, this little podcast. And I hope that it's really valuable to you, and invite you to be in on the conversation. We'll hopefully have ways that you can engage with this, and obviously comments, and we'll create events, etc., around this. But in the energy, the energy evolution, the energy is first now. The question is more important than the answer. And that's a hard shift for a lot of people to make. It's a big shift. It's a different game. And we can't fight bad answers with good answers as much as we can just delve into the mystery and see what happens. And that doesn't mean that we don't find ground to stand on from time to time to work with that. But it's this groundless ground. It's the question, the mystery, the energy, and conversation is the best word for it. So conversations with life, exploration and ecstasis, and we'll get to ecstasis in a minute. But we really feel like it's really interesting to hit this conversation piece.
I love that. I love the conversation also because it's so much more interesting. It's so much more interesting. Yeah. And there's so much more room for the reality that we're all finding is that everybody's perspective has its own version of truth. And so what is reality? And everybody wants to sit and argue about it. And it's so much more fun to just have a conversation about it. Because really, when you have the kind of conversation where where it's like agenda driven, or somebody's trying to win by being right at the end, nobody really wins that. It really comes down to who has the most resources, and they're going to win. At some level or another, they're going to win. So...
Right. And then it becomes more about being right than anything. Right, being right takes off because it takes on its own identity, and it becomes an identity rather than I'm open to the question. I mean, we both grew up in dogmatic religion, and where these are the answers, and if your experience is different, it's just this dissonance that you live with your whole life. And if they would just listen. If they would just listen.
If everybody else would just do this reality.
If I could show them my honest experience and express that to them, that would be really beautiful. But I can't. There's no permission place to do that. It's just like, no, that's bad. That's wrong. That's out. Yeah. That's beyond the pale. Whatever. And but there's no listening. And that's I believe stagnant. One of the reasons why the world is like it is.
Yeah. We don't talk about certain things.
Yeah. Don't talk about Bruno or sex or anything real to humans. Let's just pretend that your reality is however somebody experiences it, or somebody else's mystical experiences that I'm supposed to buy as real rather than my own. And I'm fine with them. I love their mystical experiences, but I have my own, and I want to see how. I want to compare notes, right? And not have anything have to be true. It's just so juicy, so much more juicy.
I love that because I think about the religion that we both came out of, and how the idea was you can have I just lost it. It was a really good thought.
Well, I'm going to pick up on your thread there. Think about it. Okay. The thread is this: like the conversation, we don't ever get what we want, and we never get what society wants. That's one of the tensions. One of the other tensions, and the thing that makes life impossible, is that we have the two ways that people want to be. The two things that people want to what they want to have is they want to have their individuality. They want to be themselves, and so we come as a self. Whatever signature we are, genetically, energetically, existentially, and we want to belong wholly, right? And you can't do both. So the existential crisis for most people is that it's interesting. I was reading the latest Gabor book, Myth and Normal, really beautiful book, but he put that in the same way, or he was quoting somebody. I can't remember. I'll go back and look at it. But the idea was this idea of attunement and individualism, right? And that's another way to put it. And it's impossible. Like, you never feel like you belong, and you never feel like you're yourself. And so that's most people's trauma, like showing up, and it's this funny game of you can't win. Like, it's a funny game. Like, life is a setup, and the only thing that makes sense to me is the mystery and the conversation, rather than the answers.
Yeah, because then what you get from that is intimacy, which that kind of satisfies that tension of not really fitting in and not really being authentic. I feel like intimacy is kind of that bridge there.
And a good conversation is intimate, right? I love that where you really feel like you're getting into the person, they're getting into you in some way, where it feels like there's permission and there's consent and there's honor. That creates that intimate connection in the conversation, and also with life, where you feel like you're in part of life. You're in it, but it's also you also have all these individual things going on that nobody will ever understand you.
Yeah, and
but,
I think
but you can be heard somewhat or seen somewhat.
Yeah, what a lot of people get into is they do a little bit of deprogramming. They access a little bit more of their personal energy, and then what they want and almost demand is for everybody else to attune to that, so that they feel like they fit in. So we discover this thing about ourselves that's unique, and then we want everybody else to validate it, which kind of like spoils the point, because then what we're doing is we're hedging in on their sovereignty, their uniqueness. And I think that's another piece of the conversation. Is there a harmonious place we can be with that, where I get to be in my expression and be responsible for feeling like I belong here, and then also can I invite your attunement, and you don't have to take on my assumptions, you don't have to take on my beliefs, but can you listen and witness? And I think that's that juicy shared space where it does change us to have those conversations. It transforms us because we're both open to that influence, but we have enough of our own energy and we're holding ourselves well enough that we're not going to be controlled. The other person's not going to control us by saying, oh, well, you have to take on my assumptions and validate me, or you're a bigot, or you're whatever label, right? And all of a sudden then you're like, oh, I don't want to be called that. Okay, I'll do whatever you say.
Identity is another way to not be in the conversation, right? So I'm this, and or you're that, right?
Yeah.
Labeling identity, kind of the same thing. I demand identity of other people to label. I take on an identity of myself. It's my ego, and so it's really interesting to think about how that stifles the conversation,
right?
Where my identity is a conversation. As in my career, as a father, as a lover, as a citizen, that conversation is so interesting. Where people want to decide, I'm not a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm this and that, and then they stick there rather than really having the conversation. It's just so freaking sticky.
Yeah.
And we, what we need is the honest, real energy conversation. That really breaks that up.
Yeah.
If we're ever going to change it. And that gets us back down to life. And so Soch, what is life? What do we mean by life?
So conversations with life. I know part of this title, is inspired by David White. I think his he has a whole thing on the conversation with reality. I know Michael Singer talks about life, him discovering, in his kind of search for some numinous God-like whatever, that's what he landed on. Like, life is the thing that's largely out of our control. And if you want, a fun experience, listen to Michael Singer's explanation of how we got here, the 13.7 billion years or whatever.
No, it's so beautiful. That whole riff is beautiful.
Beautiful, because he's just like, you gotta accept that, like, in the grand scheme of things, you don't matter and you don't have a lot of control over life. So how am I gonna show up? How am I gonna engage with this thing that's largely out of my control?
Mm-hmm.
And you can see like what our culture, like where we are, is just like absolute terrible twos resistance. Like
Mm.
we will not surrender to life.
Mm-hmm.
We will build whatever we can. We will create whatever chemicals we can. We will do whatever we need to stop life. And it just doesn't work.
And in a way, right, that's part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Right? So like life is there and we're like, I'm gonna engage and like, oh shit, that hurts.
Yeah.
What can I do to get myself out of this, right?
Yeah.
And that part that, coming existence and non-existence are part of that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do I be in here? How do I get away from here? It's really interesting.
Yeah, and how much structure and form and how much flow and just pure life force are we, allowing into our lives? And is it even about a balance? I don't know. I don't love that word. I feel like if you seek for the balance, you're probably still not.
Right, you're managing, and that's not really balance. Isn't conversation. I want a balanced conversation. I want someone to come out and say something wild that isn't wild, right?
Uh-huh.
The psychologist, what's his name? Soul's Code. James Hillman. Yeah, James Hillman talks about how it's better for parents to have a wacky ass worldview than some middle thing, because then the children at least have to figure out. They have something to push against. They can discover themselves, because the mom and dad are like, whoa, I mean, it's true with my kids. They're like, whoa, dad is way the fuck out there. So I need to somehow there's some good in staking a claim. It's just not, expecting people. It's the expectation, whatever, on that's there.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
Yeah, the expectation that grows or is almost inherent with any time we bring form in. We're trying to create some kind of stability or some kind of safety. One of my big ahas this year was, moving into downtown Salt Lake and discovering there's this beautiful canyon just blocks away, that's got a river running through it. And I was hiking up in the avenues, just paying attention, to my surroundings, and realizing that I was walking through a forest that had been inhabited with houses and streets. And I looked down and I saw this beautiful red poppy growing through a sidewalk crack. And I just laughed, because I was like, life wins. It's always gonna win.
Life wins.
It's always gonna win, no matter how you try to hold it back.
Reminds me of those photos of the whatever island that is. They had a nuclear thing at, and all nature's coming back in,
Yeah.
and how in 10,000 years there would be nothing here. Like it would be just, you wouldn't even know because
back
of life. Because of life, it would go back to the forest.
Yeah. So it's like, how do I deal with that? That's fucking scary. It's scary that this absolutely uncontrollable thing is just my existence. And it's out here, but it's also in here. And I think sometimes the tangle is more in here than we want to believe. Like the resistance to how much energy and life force is trying to move and express through us. But what if we just say, okay, life, you win. Then we can start a conversation with it. But when we have that agenda of how safe can I make my existence? How tightly can I hold this, life force that's moving through me? How much can I keep the constant flow and change of the nature of life out here, so that I don't have to deal with, the changing nature of it? What if we just said, okay, you win, let's talk? Yeah.
And I love conversations with life as a meaning path, because to me it's a little bit comforting. So life is very uncomfortable in a way.
Yes.
But it's also very comforting, because it gives us something to talk about. Like, this is our reference. I'm here. Here I am. You're there. We're here. And there is commonality. There is stuff.
Ultimate common ground.
And there's so many things that just are not explained. you
Yeah.
know, that we don't understand. We don't know how the human brain works, really. We don't know, you know, what the nature of reality is, but only in the, you know, there's just so much we don't know.
Right.
Nature of consciousness, etc., is really an interesting game.
And almost the more that we know, or that we can kind of grasp and contain, it actually reveals the vastness of what we don't know.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Conversations with life is like a conversation with a conversation, and a conversation and a conversation. It's kind of a fractal. There we go. So you know, meaning, the Viktor Frankl realization that life is about meaning, I think, is a really big thing, and meaning is important. Meaning, I think, is the most important thing, and the one of the hardest to get at, because these days there's so much noise. And there's so much that says this is it, this is the way, and everybody's trying to sell, and everybody's trying to be it, right? And so this gets us to, you know, the modern spiritual predicament, and that is the meaning crisis, and you know, that meaning crisis is fucking real. It's the big thing that everybody's working with, and in the dogma idea, that meaning crisis becomes a war, right? And it becomes like, this is my practice, my healing way, my thing, rather than, hey, how do we do this? You know, how do we help each other? You know?
Yeah, and I feel like with the meaning thing, it's this, like you said, it's a scramble, ultimately for other people's resources, to feed whatever we are probably bypassing our own meaning into.
Yeah, totally, right,
So
right.
We're like, oh, I found the thing.
I found the thing. It's yoga.
Bring all your resources.
It's breath work. Right. And this gets us into the guru bullshit, right? The guru bullshit is that people figure out something, they have a big experience, and it's not tuned well, and then they drag everybody else into it if they have a big enough personality or resources or whatever it is they have. So, you know, the modern spiritual journey has been hijacked largely, I think, by ego gurus who say this is it, and they're not in the conversation. They want to be the thing, right? And then they end up abusing people. Surprise, surprise, you know, like, oh, you know, they sexually abuse their followers, and oh, there's wacky ass shit going on, because that's a heady stuff. It's a lot to hold, and the guru bullshit is everywhere. And you know, honest guru-ness is great, and it's part of the Hindu tradition, part of the, you know, a spiritual tradition, etc. But that it's not rare. We don't have elders. One of the problems with the conversation, we don't have elders that are attuning. We don't have a common tribal mythology. We don't have anything like that, and that's led to individuals going phew, phew, and taking people off with them, right? And it's very destructive, and it's a really, I think, epidemic, you know. Guru bullshit is epidemic.
And I mean, it's an organized religion.
It's
not just like the hippie community that's got the guru thing. It's like totally like, we have your answers, give us your money.
Yeah, that's the power dynamic.
And we'll give you little doses of spirit or soul, just enough to keep you in here.
Right.
And not really tell you what your real power or what.
Yeah, you know? That's the other side of it. So we have unattuned spirituality on one side, we have, you know, dogmatic answers on the other side, and so really finding this conversation and helping each other have this conversation and really come to our own personal set of meanings and understandings. So there's a lot of ways that people come to meaning, you know. Some of the other problems are this image thing. You know, everything's on Facebook and social media, and you know, it's Instagram spirituality. It's you know, difficult to kind of see through the image of things into the reality of things. So image, in many ways, substitutes for reality in our current world, perhaps. You know, it's funny. And then there's this idea of what is the doctrine? What is true? What should be taught as true? And truth is interesting, right? Doctrine is problematic. I think there's things that are true. Honestly, this conversation, we're staking a claim. We're saying, hey, it's about the conversation, which in this way is a kind of doctrine.
Yeah.
Right? But it's about finding the right container for the energy, right? So not too narrow and not too wide, but to help in that conversation, we narrow things into a channel where it can be worked with, right? And that's what I think we're seeking to do here in our process with each other and with clients and with other people as we're teaching, is we're trying to narrow it enough so people can have their own experience but be attuned enough, right? And it's that tension again of individuality and belonging.
Yeah, and it's the purpose of containers is to find your edge.
Yeah.
We're just like spiraling out there, like, of course, whatever any person who has any level of confidence or resources says, that's going to draw you right in.
Right.
Because you don't feel like you're flailing, at least. And so having these containers where you can have the conversation, but there's like all this room for growth.
And individuality. And also, there's this modern thing of being able to leave. You grow out of container. We shouldn't sign up for anything lifelong. We should have this experience. This is like we do with careers now, but with practice, and you learn what you want from a particular thing, and then you move on. Or maybe you stay there and you deepen that process, but you don't hold it in such a way that you think that's the only thing. And then it becomes doctrine, and then you assume that's your identity, and then you assume it should be other people's identity because it worked for you. I mean, again, that's
I love that
dangerous place.
Crossover between the identity conversation and the containers conversation, because that's kind of what identity is. You're creating a container for yourself, beautiful, and
holding it
at some point you gotta let it go.
Yeah. Or let it grow.
Many times.
Let it go, or let it grow, or let it shift. Hold it in an attuned way. You don't need to chaotically.
Because you can just calcify yourself around stuff like that, and stagnate that potential for life.
Totally.
More life.
A couple more things I wanted to mention here is practice. I love how Mickey Singer talks about, like, I don't care what you do for practice. Like, do alternate nostril breathing. Sure. And it's a great practice, right? But, like, who cares, right? What you do. Because really it's not about that. It's about your journey, and you're inhabiting yourself differently. You're finding meaning. You're moving your energy in a particular way, and whatever floats that boat, man, is the way to do it. But people get hung up on practice, and there's whole communities built around practice that are very rigid in the way that they think about things. Whether it's breath work or cold plunges or yoga or whatever, and all these are beautiful things. They're all things that I do, but I can see how this becomes because people have an experience with them that's really big. They assume, oh, everybody should do this. Maybe not the truth, right?
Right.
And people get stuck in that practice where that becomes the thing, and then they expect it to be the thing, and then at some point maybe they need something else, and get stuck in this kind of loop in there. So practice is beautiful. I recommend practice to people all the time. All sorts of practice. It's great, and that gets us to lineage as well. So lineage, should I be a Buddhist? Should I be a Taoist? Should I follow a lineage? And some people will say you need a lineage, and if you need to be honest with that lineage. And I don't think that serves the future. I don't think lineage is, my personal take on it, for most people, let's bring in the lineage. I want to deep dive into these things and get them. I don't want to disrespect any lineage, etc. But also, there's so much that we're trying to work together. I really like Robert Moore on this. He's talking about there's so much in this comparative religion space, so many tools in the arsenal, and so many ways to understand this, and they all have a beautiful piece. And so, bring me some Jesus, bring me Buddha, bring me all these ideas, bring me the texts and the wisdom and the understanding. I'll never get to all of them, but my journey through each of them, bring me Jungian psychology and all these really beautiful understandings. And I personally don't feel like sticking to one of those is the modern conversation. We're living in a different world now where the tribal thing is still true for psychology, but not held well in the modern life.
Yeah, it's almost impossible. Like, we know too much about all the other tribes. And about all and there's going to be a part of us that's going to be lit up or sparked by all these different things. And so are we going to give ourselves permission to explore into that? And I think there's a spectrum with lineage too, where like you can say all lineage is bullshit. And people say that about spirituality too. I think this is that thing that I was going to say earlier and didn't, is like they'll say, They'll be in this super dogmatic religion, and then they'll get out of it and they'll be just as dogmatic about non-religion.
Mm-hmm.
And they won't be able to see anything
Mm-hmm.
about what they just experienced that was
Mm-hmm.
positive or helpful or beautiful. And so I think on that spectrum with lineage is that it's when something is practiced and you're in relationship with it for a period of time and with a level of discipline, there's treasure there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the reason that it's helpful for our systems is that we do have a huge amount of access to life force energy and the whole idea of grandiosity that I'm sure we're going to visit later a lot. But it's something to temper that with.
Mm-hmm.
To kind of bow before something, even if it's for a week.
Mm-hmm.
Bow before it and honor the fact that this lineage has been studied to a level where they have seen common results.
Mm-hmm.
You know, over a certain portion of the population is gonna have this result and be open to other things. But I do feel like it's a beautiful way to kind of temper, find your edges with your grandiose energy, because I know I inhabited for a while like it's all good, it's all, you know, and it was lovely, like playful space, but my grandiosity really wasn't tempered there. And so I was just kind of all over the place and in a bit of a jetty, like.
Well, and it's also the reason why that's true though isn't because you didn't have a lineage to follow, it's because you didn't have a container that understood the what's it called, the process, the initiatory process, right? The awakening process. There are very few containers that understand that. You know, so you have yoga communities and someone's blowing up and having a spiritual emergency, and everybody's like, "What's wrong with that person?" Right?
Yeah.
And they go see a psychologist,
They
and the
must not be
psychologist
positive
doesn't
enough.
understand it, and it ends up medicated, and it ends up like in this really way. And I'm not anti-medication either. It's just all the tools, right? But like, there's part of the problem, the reason why people go to lineage, the reason why people stay in religion, or you know, etc., is because there's not containers that are holding this conversation.
Yeah.
And that conversation, I think, is really, really valuable. Even the ones like the Unitarians or whatever, there is some, you know, really good, you know, openness and whatever, but it still comes down to usually a set of practice, a set, you know, that kind of thing. And it's also very right-hand path. And this conversation, and I think the more juicy stuff. I love right-hand path. That means, you know, spirit side, meditation, focus. We'll talk about this another time. But like that really very connected, upright, organized path,
structured,
and the left-hand path, which is just ecstasis. And so it kind of gets that, you know, gets us into that realm too, I think.
So ecstasis, our subtitle.
Yeah, exploration in ecstasis.
Ecstasis. What is that? You know, I think most people have heard the word ecstasy.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously related. What is that? And I think it is absolute presence and immersion in the present moment. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about this conversation with life, is it's that moment where you say, okay, you win. And then you get to see what life is actually giving you right now. Beyond what you're trying to create in the future, beyond all the stuff that's happened in the past. What is life trying to give you and show you right now? And how deeply am I willing to engage with it? Because the more you engage with something that is real right now in your present dance with life, the more access you're going to have to that beautiful, ecstatic energy. And then everything becomes orgasmic because you're just here, right? I was talking to a client earlier today, and I just said, you know, I could look around this room, and there's hundreds of things that I could choose. So every moment is so rich with possibilities, and it's really just like, hey, where am I gonna bring my attention right now? And when you bring your attention and you choose in and you bring your whole yes, I could sit, with a feather or a leaf and find it.
Mm-hmm.
Find that absolute satisfied hum of the life in here meeting the life out here. And it matters less and less what is going on in my external reality, because I know I can find that anywhere.
So beautiful. The ecstasis, and that being, that feeling fully happens in joy and pain too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So pain is an is an ecstasis experience, right? It's ecstasy in a way, in that you're being shown what you don't want, and you bring up, and it brings you into the present moment. Sorrow, loss, all these things are also ecstasis. So that left-hand path again involves that full spectrum of experiences, and absolute bliss, pleasure, inhabiting an absolute death urge, are all part of the ecstasis, which makes it a wild ride.
Totally.
Also, that's why it's dangerous, right? It's not an easy path. It's not something that you hold in necessarily easy. It can be difficult. It's not about being. It's not about the easy, but.
But there's ease. There's an ease to it,
right? Because once you can build, the reason why experiences an ecstasy, exploration is ecstasy, because it does take you to yourself, and that it feels really good. It just sometimes takes some cycles of self-destruction, not self-destruction, but like ego destruction to get there, and that's no joke.
Yeah, because there is in every moment there's a part of you that's dying and being reborn, and so you have to be really present with that process, that life-death process, because when you meet yourself in that ecstasis, whatever the thing is that kind of helps you get there, whether it's a practice or you go to some crazy retreat, or you happen to be meditating and like the thing happens that they tell you is gonna happen when you meditate. Like part of you has to die. And a big part of that is just like what's been built on all the stories and the judgments and the trauma that has been built on how you inhabited something similar in the past.
And conversations with life is also conversations with death, right?
Yay.
That's the game, and that death happens in identity, and it happens as we age, and it happens as we move through, and we lose people, and we lose parts of ourselves, and all these things are really interesting, and they're conversational. Death is very conversational. It's not the final word, but because life is here, we do exist.
Right.
And we persist, so it's just this interesting thing.
Yeah, and even in the idea of something dying, on a scientific level, we know that's not even really possible. It just turns into something else.
Yeah.
It's right? Energy. It's a change of form.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing I was going to say about ecstasis. Ecstasis takes you to your energy, and we'll talk a lot about energy. Energy is a thing. We'll talk about energy as a maybe some people see that as a woo thing. I have it as an experience, and we'll share our energy experiences, and that's part of the conversation with me. And ecstasis will take you to your essential energy, and you will feel energy in the experiences, right? Emotions or subtle energies or whatever they be. Those powers of spirit and soul, those big forces that come together in us, the masculine, the feminine, the light, the dark, all these polarities that we experience, right, as energy, come together in ecstasis, right, and take you to that life place of just being. I did want to read this definition of ecstasis before we leave the topic.
Oh, cool.
So ecstasis is the etymological mother of the English word ecstasy and ecstatic. Ecstasis is a moment of insight. It is a moment of total immersion in being. Your inner critic goes quiet and you're dissolved in a state of awe and wonder when everything seems to click. And I like that definition a lot. Pain has to be answered, right? And so does sorrow. Those are energies that are telling, they're ecstatic in that they do this. The clicking happens later. So part of ecstasis is to be able to move through pain, move through the uncomfortable.
Well, and same with the joy. I feel like that's one of the things that I've deeply experienced in my relationship with you, where like here we have this like almost non-agreement engagement where it's really like sovereignty is the agreement and kindness, right?
Totally. Yeah, be nice.
So and then oh my god, it gets so good sometimes.
So beautiful.
That has to be answered.
It has to be. Yeah, you're right. You're like, wait a minute.
And guess what it has to be answered with? Grief.
Interesting. Yeah.
I have to let it die in that moment, otherwise I'm going to cling and start building something that then you have to conform to.
Yep, and then you get
and
into
it's painful and just so yummy.
Because you get into the identity again, right?
Right.
So this is good, so it needs to be this way. And it's just like any practice, relationship is that same practice where, when it gets really into this beautiful place, you also need to be letting it go in that moment. And I really like that, this idea of moving into those ecstatic experiences and moving through them.
Yeah.
Right? Not getting lost into the bliss, but like moving through the bliss. Yeah,
because you experience that and you're almost automatically like clinging to it, like, how do I keep this? How do I stay here? How do I, you're on vacation at the beach and it's like, this is how I want my life to be every day. And how do I make this, and all of a sudden you're not in the experience you're having anymore. And it's the same thing with grief. You have an experience where when you're grieving over the loss of something that was very important to you, you have an incredible amount of life force energy flowing through you. I venture it's the exact same sensation as bliss. It's just your story around it is
different.
But in your physical being and like the experience, it's a lot of energy is moving. Because all of a sudden you have to face the fact of how much you loved that person. And it's like, whoa, that's a lot of love.
Or even self, I love myself right now. Does that mean I need to be this? No, right? As soon as I realize that and try to keep it, it's gone.
Right?
That's why ecstasis takes you into the energy rather than into the question, rather than the answer. Because if your conversation is over, if you experience something and then you just are chasing that the rest of your life.
Oh, I love that.
Right? It's not. That's not the good game. The good game is, okay, I'm here, I'm present with this, and I learn to die over and over again. Die every minute, die every second, right?
Yeah.
And, that's, I think, a beautiful way to be.
I did a practice for a while of having a conversation with the Grim Reaper every night as I went to sleep. And it was my kind of bow to death in honor of that. It was really, really cool to be like, and then I laid down and it was like, I die to this day. I die to my identity of this day. And then I get to wake up as this just totally new being.
Okay, well, the conversation is rich. I think we probably need to move on. There's a few things we're going to cover today. I think I'm going to make it a separate episode or whatever. Put in I'm going to put something maybe under methodology or something. But I do want to mention them. In the conversation and in the path of meaning, I find that there's three things that guide that conversation and help keep it safe and happy and good, right? And one of those things is skepticism. And I'm going to briefly define this, and we will probably do a whole thing on this because this is so important.
Yeah.
And that is, I don't believe anything. I don't believe in belief. And what I mean by that is there's things I go with. There's rules I have for myself. I'm always revising them. But there's things that I think are, oh, this is true, whatever. Like say like this conversation piece. But I don't know, right? I'll have a conversation about the conversation, and maybe that's not it. Maybe I'll end up in a lineage. I don't know, like a religion. I don't know.
There's room to be wrong.
But I don't believe. But I don't necessarily believe anything. And that's often understood as skepticism. The other thing is I don't not believe anything, and that's not often understood as skepticism. That's a piece that most people are missing on the whole skepticism thing.
Yeah.
Like I'm just gonna question everything because that feels very scientific. Like I'm just gonna be critical and I need hard evidence. Blah 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 blah. Right? Well, that makes you a very narrow-minded person because you're just out there looking for all the things that aren't true.
Yeah.
Right? But doesn't let you have the
It actually
joy.
makes you not skeptical.
True, right? It actually makes you not skeptical. It makes you dogmatic, right? Which is hilarious. Bunch of material-minded people that are actually not skeptics and say they are is a problem, right? This other piece of I'm open to everything opens you to the other side of things, opens you to the meaning, opens you to the energy, opens you to experience. Half of life is imaginal. We're perceptional beings. So skepticism is a big thing. I said I wasn't going to talk about it, and then I just did. So skepticism is a huge piece, and we'll do a whole thing on that. The next thing is self-compassion. And that is because all growth stops if you can't love yourself or intend to love yourself. Loving yourself is not a whole thing. It's a relationship. Just like that, every person has things we like and things we don't. We have things we like and things we don't. Growth happens when we can hold it in compassion. And I think compassion is divinely given. I don't know where it comes from, but there's something in me that feels that feels like things are good and that everybody means well and that I mean well, even in my worst. And so the self-compassion piece, everything stops. Energy stops when you judge, right? And judgment is the killer. You're not really yourself if you're judging. In part psychology, they say, the self does not judge. And if you have judgmental ideas and things coming up, you're not in self. The occupying self means that you're not in judgment, and that means you're in self-compassion for yourself and also for others. But it starts with self. And the other is very simply mindfulness. I've been a mindfulness teacher for a long time, taught a lot of meditation classes, etc. And mindfulness is just that ability to focus and notice what's going on without getting caught up in it. Because you have to see, you have to see. If you're too caught up in your emotions to see, then the conversation is over. And you're being played, right? Yeah. So mindfulness keeps you out of the place of being played by ecstasis. So if you're going to have ecstatic, if you're going to explore the ecstatic, you damn well better develop your mindfulness, because otherwise you're going to get taken by the energies in it. And then you'll start to create identities and you won't even know that you did it, right?
Or serving the guru thing, or all of a sudden all your resources are going into this thing because it's in some ways easier to just hand your resources over to something that can kind of trigger that ecstatic experience or whatever, than to actually be mindful and look at what's the stuff. How do I access this? Now that I've met it, how do I access it on my own?
Beautiful. A deepening of mindfulness is the idea of awareness. And so I believe it starts with mindfulness, and I think it becomes an awareness. And awareness is a whole nother thing, and we'll probably talk about that more. There's a lot to say about it. Yeah. And it's those three things. So skepticism, self-compassion, and mindfulness guide the ecstatic journey. Those are my practices that I teach and practice myself that keep me safe and attuned in the journey.
I think those are also what makes a real conversation possible.
Yeah.
Because they create enough form, but also enough spaciousness where you can actually meet the other person instead of trying to drive it in a certain direction.
Or even meet yourself. Right.
Yeah. Okay, so experiential process. I feel like I kind of talked about this a little bit already. Um,
Yeah.
being with the
Being in
journey
it.
of it and being in whatever's happening
Uh-huh.
right now. What happens with our experience and our trauma is we build all these layers on top of stuff. So we'll have a sensation, let's call it a trigger,
Mm-hmm.
and immediately we'll have some kind of like emotion or physical sensation
Mm-hmm.
that's probably neutral,
Mm-hmm.
or it might actually be like legit. Like, I feel like when I see a spider, there is a legitimate biological thing of
Mm-hmm.
like, that could kill you.
And
And it's way smaller than me. Like, I could deal with that really fast. But on top of that, I've got, you know, childhood memories. I've got stories from other people. I might have past life or ancestral stuff. Then I have judgment about the fact that I'm having a reaction, and that can go layer, layer, layer. And so one of the things is, we have all these beautiful models and things that we teach people with. Again, talking to a client today, and I was like, our minds will take those models in and be like, oh, yeah, I know the formula. I know how to do this. And so we'll try to jump right from seeing the spider to like, I love spiders, zen, right? It's bullshit. You got to be with all the layers. And so part of that awareness thing is, oh, I'm noticing this judgment piece. Oh, I'm noticing this, and getting down to, I'm having this physical sensation. And just being with what is. Because one of the things that happens with spiritual practice is it automatically becomes the thing we judge everything else against. And so awareness is a way to kind of manage the judgment.
An embodiment, like the body is the book idea, where everything comes down to our kind of lived mortal experience. We do get to experience this life in bodies, whatever we are. I don't know, but that body thing, that experiential living. I'm in my body in an experience.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm out of my body, but I'm referencing my body by being out of my body. So like,
Yeah.
so it's this funny. It's that funny tension there. I also, want to talk about just real quick here, words and meaning, because I've heard a lot of people in the spiritual community talking about non-dogmatic learning, and they're afraid of teaching almost. Right?
I can own that right now. Like, there's parts of me that are like, I'm not going to say this because it's probably bullshit.
Yeah. But again, in the conversation, you can say it because the conversation is going to talk back to you.
Yeah.
You're not saying this is true. You're saying, this is what I'm offering. This whole podcast, it's an offering. Like, totally.
Here's my experience.
Here's my experience, right? Yeah. And Robert Morgan, I was listening the other day, and he's like, well, people are afraid to have ideas.
Yeah.
You got to have ideas. The ideas are part of this. Ideas create the container. Ideas are always misunderstandings. Models are always misunderstandings. But and teaching is always helping people misunderstand it in a productive way. Because I'm understanding it with words, and words are never it. The Tao that can be spoken is not the Tao.
It's not it.
But also, there's a whole book called The Tao Te Ching. And the guy he keeps writing after that.
There's a lot of words
There's a lot of words there, right? So having the conversation, putting it in words, putting it in concepts, it really helps. And we want to talk about our experiences. If you only have the ecstatic experiences, you never attune them with conversation. Right? Even if the conversation is a hug, it doesn't have to be verbal, but like this conversation, this verbal conversation we're doing, the conversation of poets and philosophers and teachers, and the way and lineages and energies, right? All of this is so valuable to me, and I'm constantly in it. Sometimes I get addicted to it, and I realize, oh, I'm too much in the idea, and I need to like step away and just like go out and take a hike and go out and be in my experience. But being in this idea place as well is super beautiful. And I have a training in liberal arts, and Socratic method. And so I did the whole classical education thing, and I really dived into the classics for hours and hours a day, and for years reading these big books about what they call the Great Conversation. And you realize after a while, that's not it, right?
Yeah.
That a lot of this is just like bullshit. But you realize also that it's not about what you're learning. It's about the conversation.
Right.
And
it's about the experience you're having with what you're learning.
You go to these great thinkers to find out what to think. And after a while, you're like, I don't want to think. But thinking along with them, I learned some skills, and I learned some attitudes and so forth.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this experience that I had, probably about a year ago. I was listening to Abraham Hicks pretty much every day, and also Michael Singer.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some cognitive dissonance coming up, because some of their stuff, you can almost tell that they're like tapping on each other a little.
Or Carolyn Elliott,
people
Michael
who
Singer
say this, and people who say law of attraction, and they're just kind of like tapping on that a little, and that like activates me right away, because I grew up in the One True Church, right? So I had that One True Church programming, and I'm like, oh no! Who do I listen to? I have to choose now.
Just give me the 10 Commandments. And
I sat with that, and I remember just kind of getting into meditation, because I was enjoying both of them so much. And I felt like they were both like helping me expand, and it was like, I sat with that in this meditation. I was like, oh, they're both saying the same thing. They're both saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. And then I just laughed and laughed.
Yeah, and what they say and how I feel is more important than what they're actually saying.
Yeah.
Like the energy of my process with a teacher. I don't sign up to teachers. I have phases. I go in and I really dive deep into a teacher, into an idea, into a philosophy, into religion, whatever, a lineage. And then, I come out the other side going, oh, wow, that was a really good experience. And it left a mark on my soul.
Yeah, right? Change, it's transformational if you let it be, but it can also become a cage that you just hand all of everything over to.
Totally. Okay, well, people listening and people watching, this is the conversation. And I hope you jump into this with us. I hope, more than 2 people listen to this. And if they don't, then this is worth doing. This conversation piece. And vocation is this, and teaching is this. I have ideas that I think are valuable, but I don't know, right? I'll offer them. I'll offer my service. I'll offer my vocation. And if it doesn't work for people, then it won't work for people.
And that's not even really the point.
It's not really the point, yeah.
It's for it to work for people.
Right.
The point is you're having this experience.
Because I'm having this experience, and I think this experience is valuable. But where the conversation is rich, then I think that's where the energy goes. And it's not about law of attraction. It's about having a really great conversation and then letting the energy flow through it, right? And I really love this conversation. I love having this conversation with Soch. I love having this conversation with others, with myself, with teachers, with all the unseen, and with God, whatever that may be. And it's fun. So now we're going to ask the question to end today. Oh, did you have something to say?
Well, I was just going to say, it was reminding me of another little conversation I got into with a friend that was wanting some support, and he's just like, yeah, I just think once I get this, piece of structure in my life,
then I'll be okay.
Then I'll be able to, kind of manage things better, which, might be true. And I said, okay, what do you need for accountability there? He's like, okay, I'm going to make a list. I said, awesome. I'm like, your assignment this week is to make a list. And then I just said, and I don't care one bit if you do it or not. Here's the thing. I want you to notice your experience with having an assignment of making a list. What is that like for you? And whether or not you make the list or do anything on it is far less important than, I just gave you an assignment. What's it like for you to have an assignment? You're making a list. What's it like for you to be told to make a list? And so I think that's kind of an illustration of, you know, the conversation and the journey, the experience is it, not the end game.
Well, I think some people would say that's less practical because you want to do the things on the list, right? But do you? Again, right? Like, this is the conversation, making that list, and then it's, you know, knowing what you are, knowing what's meaningful to you and how that goes is how things actually get done. The book, the Control Heuristic, where they're talking about the emotional expectation. That's why we do things, right? Otherwise, the energy is blocked. You know, so noticing what is my emotional experience with this is more valuable than here's a list. I'm just going to get it out, because there will, in that way, there'll be a reaction, and the energy. When you force energy, the energy forces back. You know? And so that's also part of the conversation. So I love that. It's really brilliant. So yeah, we're going to just briefly just take a few minutes and say, okay, we're in this conversation, and we're in this conversation with life, and it's rich and it's interesting. Why are we here? How do we get into this conversation? And I'll let Soch start.
Okay.
I mean, besides being
you know, I could talk about this for a long time, but I'm going to just go back in time a little ways to a moment where I heard that Michael Singer thing. I was listening on a walk one day, and he talked about life being the numinous, the God, the uncontrollable thing that we have to deal with. We're here and we have to deal with it. And something really beautiful landed for me there. And then hearing the David White thing about having a conversation with reality. And his whole story was, you know, he walked into work one day and he was so frazzled and so fragmented with all the stuff he was trying to do that he's like, has anybody seen David? You know? And then he's like, oh, that's me. And he's like, something's not right. And he's like, okay, so then I had this process of conversations that I needed to have to get myself into a place where I was living in a soul nourishing environment in my profession. And something in me went, oh, I can have that conversation. I can sit down every day with life and say, hey. And so then we found ourselves on this boat in a lightning storm in Lake Powell, and I was sitting at the end of the boat, and we were completely surrounded by these crazy colored clouds and lightning just coming down in this bowl around us. And I was like, okay, I could die. I could die here. And sitting there with life and just saying, like, hey, I'm not afraid to die. And if I have a say here, here's what I want. I really want to go back to my family. I still want to play that game. So if I have a say here. And it was just this beautiful communion where I got to say, here's what I want, and also say, and I know I don't have any control, and like, you can take me now if you need to.
Beautiful.
So that's how I got here. Talking to life every day.
Yeah, that's lovely. So interesting. And so this conversation too, you know, I think one of the beautiful things about being born in a religion is you see the way in which people inhabit this conversation in this dogmatic way. Which also is beautiful. It's, you know, doing your duty and following the commandments and doing this, you know, temple work or doing other things. I have a lot of respect for those things. I don't think they're wrong, because they create a container for people to exercise themselves with, and some people do really well in that conversation. You know, probably better than I'll ever do with whatever wide open conversation that I'm trying to have. But you know, for me, it didn't work. I was born weird from my context. I always felt right, like an alien. Like this is weird. I feel different, wrong, somehow. You know, because you know, I was trying to figure out, because of, you know, different traumas and different experiences I had, I was trying to figure out what was wrong with me or wrong with them. So it started this very negative way. And so over time, you know, I just different times, different answers, different experiences. Was, married for 25 years, had 6 kids, had lots of life, had lots of experience, lots of learning, lots of interesting things. But eventually, I had to come out of the dogmatic, inhabited identities into real life.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the ecstatic experiences,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether I chose them, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do medicine. I'm going to, have this experience. I'm going to go to, do this practice or whatever it is. Some of them I chose.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them just happened to me, great loss and difficulty in relationship, difficulty in profession, this conversation with money and keeping oneself fed and one's children fed, it created really big experiences for me. And there I find myself, and it, took some time for me to answer that call and to be in it and say, oh, what the fuck is going on here? Really? That led to some big energy experiences, which led to a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, and then everything turned up, right, to 11. All of a sudden, there's energy flowing through me, and I'm either crazy or something. And you probably noticed the blip in the edit there. My phone ran out of battery. As you can see, we're very, very professional and not amateur at all. So, I was just talking about the Kundalini experience and how when the Kundalini experience hit, that changed my reality. Like whether or not, I don't know how I don't know how I experienced, I don't know exactly what that is. Like I keep this place of skepticism from my experiences, but I experienced energy going through my body and it was going to recreate my life. So, a lot of other people have experienced that very same thing. It's a thing, and it can't be explained by science. It can't be explained, by my rational self. Yet I had this big energy experience, and as others have had, and maybe it's just some kind of trick of the mind or meme or something. I don't know, whatever it is. But that made everything turbocharged. I had to answer questions then. Then from there, just went through a lot and went through a lot of life changes, and really had to answer the question. Had to pick up the right practice, not right practice. That's wrong. I had to pick up practice. Had to pick up ideas. Had to search. It took the conversation and really, notched it up. And so that led me to today and seeing a lot and working with, learning how to work with trauma in an effective way for myself. And so many things. And it's the conversation, and it's been amazing. I wouldn't have wanted it to be any other way. So that's where we're at, and that's why we're here. So to end this, every time I want to include a poem, maybe at the end or maybe at the beginning, but we'll do this one at the end. And this one is by Mary Oliver, called Wild Geese, probably her most popular poem. And but I wanted to read it today, even though you've already heard it, but just thinking about this in light of this conversation with the world, this conversation in ecstasis, about ecstasis, journey into ecstasis. And this is Mary Oliver, again, Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls you calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. So thanks for listening or watching or however we've reached you. Would love for you to be part of the conversation and really feel privileged to have had all the experiences I've had, and really feel privileged if you stuck with us for this whole thing, and would love to hear, your experiences or how they match up with mine. And so just anything else to add?
No, it's good.
No,
Excited to
we're excited
carry
to
on.
Okay, have
See
a
where this
beautiful day, beautiful week, wherever you're at, whenever you're at, and we will continue the conversation.